We welcome you to the Ferris Network on television. And there is major breaking news at home and abroad as we come on the air. Right now, J.D. Vance speaking in Traverse City, Michigan, as he prepares for the VP debate on Tuesday. This vice presidential debate will matter as much as the presidential debates. And Vance has the most to gain. Kamala Harris sat down basically for an infomercial tonight with MSNBC anchor Stephanie Ruhle. Some highlights or lowlights, depending on how you look at them from that. Also tonight, a major escalation from Iranian-backed proxies in the Middle East. We told you that would happen, and you can see the explosions there. In an interview today, President Biden more or less admitted the United States has lost all power in the Middle East. That in and of itself is terrifying. But first tonight, if Kamala Harris wins the election in 41 days, it will be because of Donald Trump. More precisely, because of Donald Trump's lack of discipline. By every conceivable measure, the former president should be leading the polls by 10 percentage points, maybe at least 8, but he is not. Gallup is out with a fascinating pre-election report that shows every key measure of the presidential election favoring Republicans. These are the things like the satisfaction with the country, economic confidence, presidential job approval, and views of America's standing in the world. Most notably, more Americans identify as or leaning towards the Republican Party. That's based on polling over the last 3 months. That hasn't happened. That switch hasn't happened since 2000. It's been Democrats across the board. Party identification is one of the biggest predictors of how the country will vote. Republicans defied the odds, you can see here, in both 2016, Donald Trump's victory, 2004, George W. Bush. This is about the best environment for Republicans in 20 years. Another key part of the poll shows Americans trust Republicans more on the most important issues to voters. This year, it is the economy. As you can see, the party trusted more on the single most important issue to voter wins the elections. This chart here goes all the way back to 2004, but you can go back further. This measure has proved true for every election cycle since 1948. There's a guy named Harry Truman who won then, a great Missourian. It is arguably the single most important election predictor. And this year, Republicans, as you can see, have the edge, and a fairly significant edge at that. But somehow, some way, the presidential polling average shows Trump is trailing Harris by 3.7%. Over the past week, Trump's numbers have fallen. The Harris campaign, let's be honest, everybody really knows Trump struggles to stay on message. So the Harris campaign sits back, schedules interviews with friendly networks. For example, the vice president's latest sit-down is with MSNBC anchor Stephanie Ruhle, who told the world exactly how she feels about Trump and Harris.
Kamala Harris is not running for perfect. She's running against Trump. We have two choices. And so there are some things you might not know her answer to. And in 2024, unlike 2016 for a lot of the American people, we know exactly what Trump will do, who he is, and the kind of threat he is to democracy.
So since Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, nothing else matters to a certain group of people, namely the group of people picked to interview Kamala Harris. Call it an infomercial, maybe, rather than an interview. Fine. That really shouldn't matter to Donald Trump and his team, because this is Trump's to lose. Just listen to union voters in Michigan and how concerned they are with Trump's actions on January 6th.
February 6th?
January 6th.
January 6th. So I remember that day. I know he was the standing president. I'm not familiar with the charges that are being brought against him for that. I'm not following that charge or I know there's multiple court cases going on. I'm just not familiar with it.
I mean, that doesn't sound like it's going to be a factor in deciding who to vote for.
No.
Okay, so when I say January 6th, what do you think?
Oh, I just remember seeing it on the news, like all the riots and stuff. Don't really know what it was about or what happened, though.
How did it make you feel when you saw it?
I don't know. I don't really feel any way about it.
Alex Wagner was trying so hard and was so disappointed. 41 days out, and those are the voters Donald Trump needs to talk to. They are waiting to hear from him. We begin tonight with Chris Cillizza, journalist, senior advisor at the DGA Group, Substack, offers some of the best political analysis out there, second only, of course, to War Notes. But
yes, that's fine.
Interestingly enough, you and I both today independently decided the single most important piece of political news out there was this Gallup.
And I will say, I did not know that that's what we were leading the show with. So it's a nice confluence. But yes, I'm glad we're doing it because you're exactly right. Out of everything that's out there on a given day, I always like to say, what's the one thing that's like actually important? This is actually important.
So in short, the way you explain the difference between this is Donald Trump's delusion for the first time in 20 years.
Yeah.
Americans prefer Republicans over Democrats, and yet Trump is down multiple points and tied in swing states is mean tweets.
Okay, let me expand slightly on that.
Okay.
All right. If I didn't, we just go to break. No, so here's what I think. He is, without question, who the base of the Republican Party wants, identifies with, and thinks is their guy. That was clear during the primary.
Right.
It wasn't really a contest, right? He ran away with it, if we're being honest. It was a coronation. The problem in my mind is Donald Trump is among, if not the weakest, general election nominee for Republicans. So there's no way that someone other than Donald Trump was going to win the primary. It's just, pick who you think is going to run. He was going to win.
Okay, let me put this in short for you.
Yes.
If Nikki Haley was the nominee,
she'd be ahead by 5 to 8 points.
Right. Okay. So that's the issue.
Just based on, by the way, Leland, just based on, I would say if generic Republican.
Right. Well, that's what the poll says.
That person, a Republican, if you showed me that Gallup data and you said, all right, Chris, you've just flown in from another planet. You don't know who's winning. Which party do you think is winning the presidential race? I would say, well, obviously the Republicans.
By 5.
By a statistically significant margin. All
right. So Kamala Harris is doing her very best to run as anybody but Trump because of the unpopularity of Trump. And you could say the lack of popularity that she enjoys, or at least did before she became the nominee. Here she is with Stephanie Ruhle. You and I differ on the interview, but we'll take a listen.
Yep.
He's just not very serious about how he thinks about some of these issues. And one must be serious and have a plan, and a real plan that's not just about some talking point ending in an exclamation at a political rally, but actually putting the thought into what will be the return on the investment.
So
this is her talking about tariffs. She was asked, and credit to Stephanie Ruhle, she was asked, you dragged Donald Trump over tariffs, but you, the Biden administration, have kept Donald Trump's tariffs and have added to them. And that's her answer?
So the thing that I struggle with when it comes to Trump versus Harris is a lot of people say, like, well, Trump's not serious and he says all kinds of crazy stuff, and how could you buy? I sort of grant that's true in my mind. Donald Trump could win this race if he disappeared for the next 41 days and issued a press release once a day, no True Social, no Twitter, no campaign appearances, no speeches, no media appearances, just one statement a day on immigration and the economy, and said, look, Kamala Harris had 3.5 years to do this and she didn't do it. So I think that's true. Everything is true about Trump. The problem I have is I don't think that excuses that we just ignore everything about the other person who wants to be the president of the United States. And that answer, I mean, to be candid, I know she put out an 80-page plan or whatever. There's not really anything new in there.
Well, a lot of it was cribbed from the Biden plan. And it's not even new from what we've heard her say, the few details she has rolled out about it. So it's like, it's not that, as a callback, remember when Elizabeth Warren ran for president in 2020, her whole thing was, I've got a plan for that. She had a detailed plan on everything. Now, you could disagree, but there was like, we're going to do this, and then this, and this, right? That's not the Harris campaign. It never has been. It wasn't her campaign in 2020, and it's certainly not her campaign now. So I don't buy that we have to give Kamala Harris a totally free pass because Donald Trump is who Donald Trump is. I grant that. Well, you say we don't have to give her a totally free pass. That should be the basic, right? I mean, both sides should be judged on their merit. Not graded on the curve based on how bad you think the other people are. seems to be Stephanie Ruhle's part of saying, I don't want to say the quiet part out loud, but just exposing to the viewers how she really thought.
I mean, that's my view. I know a lot of people, because they send me angry notes, disagree with me. Well, Donald Trump is a fascist who's going to overturn democracy, so my phone is a better alternative. It's like, I mean, I guess if you think that, I understand that way of thinking. I just don't think he's a fascist. And even if he wanted to overturn democracy, I think our institutions are strong enough to uphold it. And I just don't think that means that, well, we have to go with the other person without asking any questions about what that person believes, why that person has changed their views.
That makes you sort of respectfully marginally fair, right? I mean, that sort of should be the basic.
I'm going to put that on my obituary. Chris Lizza, marginally fair.
Because to simply say, well, we shouldn't demonize the other side. We should actually ask real questions.
Ask questions.
That's pretty basic. And this happens to Kamala Harris, and it happens all the time when you walk into friendly interviews, which I think it's going to be really interesting to see the rest of the Stephanie Ruhle interview, because so often you say more than you really should. Totally. You let the cat out of the bag. This didn't get much pickup yesterday. The NPR interview, Michigan radio station, talking about eliminating the filibuster. Take a listen.
I think we should eliminate the filibuster for Roe. And we need and get us to the point where 51 votes would be what we need to actually put back in law the protections for reproductive freedom and for the ability of every person and every woman to make decisions about their own body and not have their government tell them what to do.
And then everybody moves on. The follow-up question is, well, why stop at Roe, right? If eliminating the filibuster is what you're in favor of, then it's all of a sudden we're back to the Green New Deal. It's whatever tax hikes that she wants to put in. It's confiscating guns. It's what do you do with health insurance?
Yeah, so when when I heard that quote initially, and I did write about it, but when I heard it again tonight, what stands out to me is she says, end the filibuster for Roe. Well, anyone who knows anything about how things work up there is you don't get to just do it for that one thing. If you say the legislative filibuster is gone, then Pandora's box is open.
Right.
The Senate now looks like the House. It's majority rule.
Right. Typically in the U.S. Senate, you need 60 votes to do most things.
Major, right.
Well, except Supreme Court justice. Yep. To do major things, major legislative things, you got to get to 60. And it serves as a check on sort of the extreme of one party or the extreme of another party. This is more of a think piece, but for people who talk all the time about protecting institutions, that seems to be gone now as something that matters.
Yeah, I mean, this is a thing that drives me crazy about both sides, and I don't mean to both sides it, but there is like this situational ethics that exists. It's kind of like, well, it's bad when they do it, but it's okay when we do it because we're right. Well, not everybody. I mean, the thing I always remind people, not to make it all about Trump, but the thing I always remind people is, look, Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, whether he admits it or not. He got 74 million votes in losing. This is not a splinter group of America.
It's half of America.
He's going to get at a minimum, whether you think he's going to win or lose, at a minimum, he will get 46% of the national popular vote, and at a maximum, 48, 49. Like, the dismissal of all of these people as, oh, well, they just don't know any better. Oh, it's all a cult. I'm like, it's 74 million people.
Well, and
we have to understand those people.
To be fair, when Hillary Clinton dismissed them, she lost. So it's also bad policy.
Deplorables.
Look,
right.
the reason we have you is because you are fair. You don't dismiss either side, which is what we try to do here as well.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for having me. And can I say something? I will say, Leland and I disagreed about something earlier, and I appreciate you saying, hey, like, this is how I feel. This is how you feel. Let's talk about it. We need more of that.
You come here every day. We have a good conversation. That's what it's about.
Yeah, dude.
Thanks, my friend. Good to see you. Biden administration is begging for de-escalation, and nobody cares. Hezbollah continues to fire missiles into Israel. Why America is becoming irrelevant on the world stage, and just how dangerous that is. These look like some friendly folks, don't they? Video from near the University of Michigan. It is pro-Hezbollah protesters marching through the streets. University of Michigan. They're supporting a terrorist organization that came to life by killing 230-plus American Marines. For so long, we were told, oh, the campus protesters, they're just worried about the dying Palestinian kids. I told you back then that it was hogwash. This video proves it. They are supporting Hezbollah. Hezbollah is in Lebanon, another country, and they keep firing missiles at Israel. Israel keeps defending itself. The Biden administration keeps telling Israel to stop. It is not working. Israel right now is planning a ground invasion of Lebanon to stop Hezbollah. And President Biden seems completely oblivious to it. Here he is today on The View.
An all-out war is possible, but I think there's also the opportunity, or still in play, to have a settlement that could fundamentally change the whole region. There needs to be a two-state solution. Ultimately, it needs to happen.
Evidently, the 1990s are calling Mr. Biden. They want their foreign policy back. You cannot have a two-state solution with terrorists. It's very simple. The Biden administration keeps lowering the bar of success in the Middle East and keeps failing. From Axios, we want to prevent a ground war, a senior U.S. official said, recalibrating the Biden administration's focus on what might still be achievable, because that whole idea of a ceasefire that was going to happen by a Monday in April is gone. So let's review President Biden's foreign policy position in the Middle East right now. He is begging Iran to stop Hezbollah's firing into missiles to prevent the ground war that he is so worried about, mostly for domestic political reasons. And Iran is actively trying to assassinate Donald Trump. That may be Joe Biden's legacy in the Middle East. Joel Rubin is here, Democratic strategist, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs. Welcome.
Thanks, Leland. Appreciate it.
That leading from behind thing doesn't seem to be working so well, is it?
I think the leading from behind line was a horrific line from a messaging perspective, but the United States, we're not leading from behind in the Middle East right now. Our support for Israel has been rock solid since day one after October 7th. The amount of military munitions, supply has been unending, and in many ways that's cost President Biden politically within the Democratic base. And as we see in the protests, a lot of anger at President Biden for supporting Israel. And even to your point on Iran, the United States shot down a barrage of missiles aimed at Israel.
Please don't tell me you are going to try to convince our audience, which is smarter than this, that somehow Joe Biden has been tougher on Iran than Donald Trump was.
Well, I think what we see is a policy that has been in free fall ever since we got out of the Iran nuclear deal. And I know we've talked about this before. I'll say it again. Iran is extremely close to having enough fissile material for one nuclear weapon. And that is something that was not going to happen before withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal.
Disagree entirely. And now that we've given them a bunch of money, they're even closer. The Iranians never lived by the nuclear deal to begin with. But the issue right now is, how do you prevent a war with Hezbollah? For 11 months, Joe Biden has handcuffed the Israelis with how you fight the war matters and on and on and on. Had he simply taken the handcuffs off and not been so worried about escalation, well, then the Israelis would have taken care of business in Gaza in 2 months. It would have been over. Here's the problem. When will the Biden administration realize that the soothing, the everything's going to be fine, we need a ceasefire, no escalation, is the problem and is emboldening the Iranians?
Well, I don't think this is the only argument that President Biden's made, but even the Israeli people have been arguing they want a ceasefire for a hostage deal in the streets of Tel Aviv. The defense minister was calling for that as well. Lebanon is separate. But Hezbollah, I will tell you that in the fighting with Hezbollah, it's unjustifiable what Hezbollah has done to Israel and its north. I remember decades ago living in Israel and seeing rockets coming down to northern Israel.
That's scary.
And the Israeli prime minister at the time, Yitzhak Rabin, said there will be quiet in the north. And the next day, Israel bombed into southern Lebanon, 500,000 refugees, and there was quiet in the north. Israel supports this, and I think the United States supports the kind of protection of Israel. Does not want a ground war, though. And Israeli people don't want a ground war.
But by continuing to talk about the need for de-escalation that they've been talking about for 10 months, that's not working. When is the realization that escalate to de-escalate, which is what the Israelis are now doing on their own, may be the only option?
Well, the big concern is it escalate without the de-escalate in the next day? And the Israelis do need to have a plan for a day after to stabilize Gaza. Look, we learned the hard way in Iraq that after the shock and awe period and after overthrowing Saddam, there was an insurgency, and we lost a lot of people because of that, and we were stuck. And there could be an insurgency in Gaza, too, and that has to be avoided as well.
Okay. you were in the Obama administration. You remember better than most the Syria red line, right? That President Obama did not enforce. This is the problem. When America retreats and leads from behind, this is what happens. The bad boys of the world start acting out and say whatever you want. That you have the Afghanistan withdrawal, which was a complete disaster. You had giving the Iranians $1 gajillion, which has been a complete disaster. You had allowing Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine, which has been a complete disaster. When does the Biden team go, we're going to think about this differently?
Well, I'm going to wind the clock back even further. I was a civil servant in the State Department in the Bush administration.
Oh, boy.
We invaded Iraq.
That didn't work out so well either.
And that really undermined our ability to have the kind of pressure and the power that you're talking about.
Hold on. You seem to be missing, okay, and I'm going to give you the last word. You seem to be missing that time from 2017 to 2019, moved the embassy to Jerusalem.
Right,
you had the Abraham Accords. Yes. The entire Middle East had been what was at peace and was being redrawn in favor of Israel and against Iran, and that seems to have all been given up.
Well, no, that was not given up. The Abraham Accords were not given up. But unfortunately, during that time, Hamas was getting funded during the Trump administration. Hezbollah was arming during the Trump administration. Iran was advancing its nuclear program after the nuclear deal ended. We don't control, and this is the thing, this is the hardest part about international affairs, is we don't control all the bad actors in the world. The question is oftentimes, what do we do to defend and deal with it? And I'm glad we're backing Israel in this. I think Israel is going to go further on Hezbollah. I do believe that the rest of the countries look at us as the essential power, despite all the accurate problems, as you point out. Just yesterday...
I told you I was going to give you the last word, not the last half of the show.
I love this stuff. Thank you, Leland. Appreciate it.
All right, now we're going to make a wild turn. This is what they call a transition in television. America is becoming less woke. Can we ever get comedy back? Good transition, right? Less woke. The Economist, of all people, did a deep dive on the cultural revolution that has sparked a counter-revolution. Some of the statistics they cite: the share of Americans who consider sexism a very or moderately big problem peaked at 70% in 2018 in the aftermath of Me Too. The share believing that women face obstacles that make it hard to get ahead peaked in 2019 at 57. With us now, comedian and actor Rob Schneider. You may know him from his movies Grown Ups or The Benchwarmers. His time on Saturday Night Live as well. We'll get to that. New book out, You Can Do It. Speak Your Mind, America. Rob, good to see you. Welcome to the program. Is that what's happening, that America is speaking their mind and all of a sudden the woke movement is dying?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, I wrote the book to kind of encourage it. As my friend James Lindsay from New Discourses says, he thinks the woke empire, which is nothing but Marxism redressed as manners, he says it'll collapse between 12 and 18 months. And I think he's right. I think people are sick of it. What happens is, in a free society like ours, it makes us susceptible to people who are bad faith actors. And the people who are crying and whining and complaining the most, we give them the benefit of the doubt and go, well, there must be something they're so upset about. And it's really a manipulation. So I think people now have kind of come to their senses. As far as, people speaking their mind, the Cato Institute did a very interesting study just 2 years ago that said that roughly 2/3 of Americans feel like they cannot speak their mind freely out of fear of causing offense. And roughly 1/3 feels like they can't speak their mind, which might cause them job opportunities. That's very new.
No,
we have to have discourse not just shouting down. We need to have the best ideas come to the surface. And the way you do that is by dialogue. So
that is new, right? That 1/3 of Americans are worried about their jobs if they speak up, if they speak out politically. The polling seems to indicate that Donald Trump supporters are a little more likely to be worried about coming out and speaking up politically than those who support Kamala Harris. But I'm wondering how you came to this in the arc of your career, because typically people from entertainment, Saturday Night Live, successful actors, that's not the people who end up writing the book about free speech.
Well, you saw a contraction in free speech during COVID. actually before COVID. It was during the Obama administration where he put into legislation to allow propaganda from government agencies to directly propagandize Americans, which is really something that hadn't happened since the Woodrow Wilson administration. So that was 2013. So you've seen a real contraction in freedom. I mean, you have Mark Zuckerberg, who apologized just a week ago for violating Americans' First Amendment rights, free speech, with the Biden-Harris administration. So at a certain point, you have to say, that while the Democrats want to paint themselves as the good guys, they're not.
So how much of this book is political versus cultural?
Well, I think it's like it talks about the cultural tides. And, the idea that there's a line, there is no line. It's just kind of goes back and forth. And the comedians, what happened is comedians were the de facto intellectuals. And I mean that during COVID and slightly before and after, you had people, scientists who were silenced through the Biden administration, and they were silenced even though they were correct, like Bhattacharya, Dr. Corey, Peter McCullough. These are doctors who were correct, and they silenced them. And then you had and other scientists became silenced because they didn't want to lose their.
So how does this work going forward? The pendulum, I think you rightly point out, swung pretty hard one way. And you had the combination of COVID, the Biden administration, the brave new world of censoring social media all come together. We pointed that out a lot on the show. How is it swinging back?
Well, you would hope that Americans have had enough of it. But at the same time, you have Kamala Harris and Tim Walz who are saying that free speech is a privilege, which is completely incorrect. It is a right. It is our First Amendment right. It's what our founding fathers said, even more important than guns. The real protection against tyranny was the rights of Americans to speak their mind. And so that was, I think that's a mistake. And I really feel like whether it's AOC or whether it's Kamala or whether it's Tim Walz, you really have people who want to control your speech. And I would just say to all Americans and everybody watching out there, the people trying to censor other people are never the good guys. And that's the Democrats right now.
Okay. Well, look, you make a great point that anytime you're trying to censor the other side, it says something about your own arguments. There is an issue of relevancy, right? That the typical liberal Hollywood elite, and I would argue sort of New York elite, have lost a lot of relevance. Even the media has lost a lot of relevance. The typical establishment media has lost a lot of relevance because of what they went along with. You talked about credibility with COVID. There were some other issues as well. You had a great career on Saturday Night Live. I'm thinking about how Saturday Night Live defined the 2008 presidential race, especially when it came to Sarah Palin. Take a look.
Hillary and I don't agree on everything.
I believe that diplomacy should be the cornerstone of any foreign policy.
And I can see Russia from my house.
Yeah.
And that was the end of Sarah Palin. She became a punchline. Does Saturday Night Live still have that power? Saturday Night Live is live for the first time this election season on Saturday night. Your predictions?
Well, I think that Saturday Night Live traditionally has always leaned left. Most comedians, most people in New York do. And I think that they're in a better place now. They've been making fun of Biden as the ends of last year, and they have a really good cast now. I will say I think they lost their footing for a little while, but that's anytime you have any establishment entity, and the establishment, Saturday Night Live is an establishment. It is, and so it's corruptible. But I think that they also can correct itself. I think they're a really terrific organization. I think if you just take a look at the firing of the man that they fired, the comedian, for insensitive remarks, and then he ended up hosting. The same thing with Norm Macdonald. He got fired for OJ jokes, and then he came back a year later to host. So I think that they have I think they have the wherewithal to make corrections to it. And hopefully that it should always go after the people in power. And the audience knows if it's funny or not. Sometimes I think during COVID, I think you had a kind of a no footing for some of the late night comedy. I think that, if you look at Steve Colbert and the dancing syringes, I think that was something out of like the Soviet bloc or something out of the Khmer Rouge. It was something that was very egregious.
Well, look, Colbert, Kimmel, and others have gotten crushed in their ratings.
Yeah, well, if you take a look at the number one late night guy.
People vote with their feet. Hey, Rob, we appreciate it. Great having you on. Congrats on the new book.
Thank you so much for having me, Leland.
All right. Thank you. Good to see you. Live pictures of Key West, Florida, where the outer bands of Hurricane Helene are coming ashore, crashing over the seawall there, how the storm could change the presidential election. Through before crashing into the Florida Panhandle. You can see the hurricane party underway at Sloppy Joe's Bar, Key West. Life-threatening flash floods, winds, and tornadoes will extend all the way into Tennessee by the weekend. The latest forecast says it could come ashore as a Category 4 storm. As always, it is the storm surge that normally kills. The eye will pass right over Tallahassee, where NewsNation's Brooke Schaefer is. These folks are getting a few last-minute provisions before hunkering down. Good evening, Brooke.
Yeah, hey there, Leland. We'll start with somewhat of the good news, if you will. My photographer, Mo, and I, we've driven around to a lot of gas stations here in Tallahassee. A lot of them look like this. There's still gas available, and you can see people here, filling up their tanks, topping off right before this hurricane heads in tomorrow. But when we talk about some of the concerning details about this storm, right now a Category 1 hurricane, but predicted to potentially be upgraded to a Category 4 by the time it makes landfall here in the Florida Panhandle. There is, of course, a serious concern about high winds, but there's also the potential for life-threatening storm surge, especially in Florida's Big Bend area, where they could see potentially up to 15 feet of storm surge. My team went out there today. We spoke to several people who were boarding up their houses, packing up their cars, and evacuating. They said they do not want to risk it with a storm like this and a potential direct hit.
We're already packing up. So I don't want to take any chances.
You plan for the worst and hope for the best and just try to, hope it dodges some way. You hate for it to be anywhere in Florida, but it looks like somebody's going to get it. We saw what they are capable of, and it's frightening. But frankly, we've been, fortunate in the past, and we hope we get, good fortune again.
And that flooding concern really across the state of Florida. Right now, almost all of Florida's west coast is under storm surge warnings. Leland?
Yeah, we've seen so often people who don't heed the evacuation warnings calling for help, and it's too late for help to come, which undoubtedly, sadly, will happen over the next 24 to 36 hours. Brooke, thank you very much. We'll check back in. Remember the NFL kicker who became famous for talking about traditional gender roles? Well, he is now getting the last laugh. Just so we all know where we're coming from, here's the graduation speech that made Harrison Butker famous just a few months ago.
Some of you may go on to lead successful careers in the world, but I would venture to guess that the majority of you are most excited about your marriage and the children you will bring into this world. I can tell you that my beautiful wife, Isabel, would be the first to say that her life truly started when she began living her vocation as a wife and as a mother.
Butker's jersey sales now put him 11th in the NFL, ahead of fellow Chief and boyfriend of Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce. Right after the graduation, the women's version of Harrison Butker's personalized gear sold the most. It's a story you won't hear about on CNN. Evidently, we know why, because here was their reaction to the original speech.
I mean, it's unbelievable what Butker was saying in this speech, saying that women might be better off staying at home instead of pursuing careers. That's it. It's 2024. Yeah, I mean, that's insane.
And it's 2024. Women can decide for themselves what they'd like to do. A number of them decided to buy Harrison Butker's jersey. We first wrote about this in War Notes. That's our free daily newsletter that comes out every day at 4 p.m. You can also connect with us on social media at Leland Vittert on Instagram and Twitter. Go to warnotes.com, subscribe for free. You can respond to the email as well that comes out. We read them all. Lynn writes, Leland, Don't be so fair. I wait all day for On Balance and have to waste half the time with clueless Kamala's speech. Have to keep the TV on mute because I don't know when you are coming back on. Well, to be fair, you could skip Trump's speeches if you want. He's not much more uplifting, she writes. Lynn, thank you for watching. As you noted, we took Trump's speeches in our hour last week and Harris's as well. Fair is fair. As someone who has to sit here through all of them over and over and over again, Lynn, let me tell you, I do feel your pain. Vince writes, best newsletter out there ever. Rock on Vittert. Vince, thank you. Tell your friends. Christmas is just around the corner, so you can give your friends a free subscription to War Notes. Go to warnotes.com, type in their email. They will thank you all year. Dan and Kathy write, Leland, we just wanted to say how much we enjoyed your special with Bill O'Reilly on Friday night. There's a lot more we would like to say about how much we respect your professionalism, but we will leave it for another time. Dan and Kathy, why stop now? Thank you, though. It was one of the highest rated programs for a Friday in NewsNation history. That doesn't have much to do with me, probably actually nothing to do with me, but everything to do with Bill O'Reilly and his new book, Confronting the Presidents. It debuted #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. To channel my inner Bill O'Reilly, it makes a great Christmas gift. Get it on Amazon. Frank writes, love the program, could use a little less or a lot less Trump-Harris. There has to be some other news that's worth reporting. I hear you, Frank. 41 days left. In the meantime, ask and you shall receive. We're in the customer service business. Rather than Trump and Harris news, how about some Vance-Walz news? Vance and Walz both got the nomination because they're good at arguing on cable TV. But how can two men arguing appeal to women voters? Both Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz got the vice presidential nomination, at least in some part, for the very same reason. They're very good on cable TV.
I wish the American media was half as interested in the stress on the local schools, the stress on the hospitals, and unaffordable housing as they are in debunking a story that comes from the residents of Springfield.
These guys are just weird. That's where they are. So it isn't much else. Don't give them the power. Look, are they a threat to democracy? Yes. Are they going to take our rights away? Yes. Are they going to put people's lives in danger? Yes.
Appealing to the very narrow audience on MSNBC or Fox News is very different than appealing to swing voters tuning in for the first time, which millions will for the vice presidential debate. With us now, Sophia Kai, Axios politics reporter, Julia Manchester, national political reporter for our partners at The Hill. Ladies, welcome, welcome. We were talking at the break, pop the popcorn, right?
Oh, yeah.
Sophia, are you seeing anything from the campaigns that they are trying to change the message of sort of these guys who were hired, for lack of a better term, for being firebrands to being something more approachable?
Yes, both of them.
How?
J.D. Vance has to come off not weird, right? Because a lot of viewers, they saw the attacks that were coming and they haven't seen him head to head with Tim Walz. These are two guys with very different, interesting backgrounds. They're both sold as appealing to the blue-collar worker. It's a very important voting bloc in this election. And then you've got Tim Walz, who hasn't been tested on the national stage. So it would be a very interesting matchup next Tuesday. And, I think each of them is going to be trying to find the best attack points for the other person.
Julia, Sophia's right. White working-class men who both were picked to appeal to. It doesn't seem as though Tim Walz has sort of delivered on that. But the other key group in this is women. There's a huge gender gap, especially among unmarried women. Is two men arguing with each other appealing to swing female voters?
That's a good question. Look, we'll see. But I do know that we can expect to see Tim Walz hit J.D. Vance over that attack line, or that line he made a few years ago about childless cat ladies. Expect that to come up. Expect abortion to come up. I think you're going to see Tim Walz trying to pin these issues down on J.D. Vance. But I just want to piggyback on one point Sophia made about Tim Walz not being tested. That's absolutely true. I think you see the difference between him him and J.D. Vance is, even J.D. Vance has become sort of this, obviously this, I think, target bully point for the left. He goes on CNN. He goes on these other networks that a lot of conservatives may perceive as not being friendly. We haven't seen Tim Walz do that as much. So this is going to be a new kind of territory for him.
All right, so this is Pete Buttigieg, who is playing Vance in debate prep. Take a listen.
He achieves a certain credibility by criticizing both parties, saying that Democrats and Republicans in the past have gotten things wrong. But then all the prescriptions he seems to be ready to vote for or act for are things like undercutting a right to choose or tax cuts for the rich or a lot of other things that I think are objectionable about just good old-fashioned Republican policy. So I'm just thinking a lot about how to penetrate that veneer.
Double secret underwater chess. But, Sophia, this would be the question from Julia's point, which is there a danger, or how does the Harris campaign combating the danger that Tim Walz hasn't been tested day in, day out in the combat that is a debate where you see J.D. Vance showing up on the Sunday shows willing to duke it out every week?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And J.D. Vance knows that. And this is why, when I'm talking to the Vance team about what their debate prep looks like, the Vance team knows that, look, he thinks that he's been asked every difficult question on the planet.
3 times.
It might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but this is why, they've got Tom Emmer playing Tim Walz, another lawmaker from Minnesota. Tom Emmer has been studying all of Tim Walz's debates, studying the oppo against J.D. Vance. This is why something that I'm going to be looking for, Leland, is going to be whether J.D. makes new news on policy. We know that he's more invested in policy than Trump. We know that he's got more of the details.
No, he was the one who made the child tax credit news. He was the one who sort of put that out. So, JD.
And so, take a look at the test substance, too, on Tuesday.
Yeah. Well, we said more notes that J.D. Vance had more to gain because there's more opportunities. Tim Walz, sometimes when you're a new guy, you have more to lose. Ladies, thank you very much. The Hill, Axios, great reporting in both on this. Set your DVRs next Tuesday, debate night. I'll see you tomorrow night.